The Honda Shadow 750 is the undisputed king of the starter cruiser market. Reliable, affordable, looks incredible. But here is the dirty secret hiding in the used market. Not all Shadows are created equal. Today, we go generation by generation. The exact years to avoid, the forever years, the prices, and the 3 checks to run before you hand over a single dollar. The Shadow has one of the longest production runs in the cruiser segment. But not every year is the same, and some of them will cost you significantly more than you bargained for. The Ace and early Spirit era, 1998 to 2003. To understand why the Honda Shadow 750 has such a massive presence on the used market today, you have to go back to the late 90s. The metric cruiser market was an absolute war zone. Yamaha, Kawasaki, Suzuki, and Honda were all desperately trying to capture the American cruiser aesthetic without copying Harley-Davidson, which is a harder design challenge than it sounds, because Harley had been building the aesthetic for 70 years. Honda pulled no punches. They released the American Classic Edition, known as the Ace, and it was immediately clear they had done something interesting. To make it sound right, Honda actually engineered a single-pin crankshaft for this specific engine. Most metric cruisers used offset dual-pin cranks for smoothness. Honda wanted that authentic, galloping exhaust note, the kind Harley riders call the potato. It sounded so convincingly like a Harley that Harley-Davidson actually filed a massive lawsuit against Honda attempting to trademark the sound of a V-twin engine. That is correct. Harley tried to own a sound. They lost, for the record. Underneath all that chrome, this bike ran a 745 cubic centimeters liquid-cooled 52-degree V-twin on a traditional chain drive. It was a massive sales success. But the early years came with some incredibly complex baggage that modern buyers need to know about before they start scrolling through Facebook Marketplace. The early production years look appealing on a listing. Here is what is hiding underneath. The years to avoid, 1998 to 1999. If you see a pristine 1998 Honda Shadow Ace for a suspiciously low price, stop and think carefully before clicking the phone number. The trap is sitting directly underneath the fuel tank. The early Ace models used a dual carburetor setup. Specifically, twin 𝐾 36mm carburetors tucked incredibly tightly between the two V-twin cylinders. In theory, a dedicated carburetor for each cylinder gives you superior throttle response. In practice, on a 30-year-old budget cruiser with fuel that has been sitting since last autumn, it is an absolute maintenance nightmare. If you cannot rebuild and sync dual carburetors yourself, you will be paying a mechanic several $100s every other season just to keep it running smoothly. That is money you did not budget for when you saw the attractive asking price. To put a number on it, a professional dual carburetor rebuild and sync on these early models runs between $350 and $500. That is not a one-time cost. That is a recurring cost that will happen every time the bike sits through a winter, every time the vacuum lines age out, and every time the vibration of the engine knocks the synchronization off again. If the previous owner did not stay on top of this, and many did not, the carburetors may be badly gummed and require a full rebuild rather than just a sync. You are now deep into unexpected expenses on a bike you bought for a bargain. What does that look like in practice? You are cruising down the highway, everything feels fine, and then your headlight slowly fades to a yellowish glow. The speedometer drops to 0. The bike dies and coasts to the shoulder while you reconsider your life decisions. If you buy one of these, avoid years. Budget between $350 and $500 for a professional dual carburetor rebuild and sync. If the stator fails on top of that, add another $250 in parts, plus the labor cost of draining the engine oil and removing the side covers to replace it. Your bargain bike is becoming less bargain-like by the minute. By 2001, Honda had heard the complaints and fixed the problem properly. The forever years, 2001 to 2003. Honda is a company run by engineers who actually pay attention to what owners report. By the 2001 model year of the 750 Spirit, they had made a massive mechanical change that transformed this bike from a maintenance headache into a legend. They switched to a single carburetor setup, one 34mm 𝐾 carburetor feeding both cylinders through a Y-shaped intake manifold. This sounds like a small change. It is not a small change. One carburetor means zero syncing, half the number of tiny brass jets to clog with bad fuel, fewer vacuum lines to dry rot and crack. The electrical gremlins that plagued the late 90s models were largely ironed out by the factory. That change alone produced a motorcycle that owners on Honda Shadow forums routinely describe riding to 80,000 miles or more on nothing but routine chain maintenance, regular valve clearance checks, and basic oil changes. It simply refuses to die. That is not a marketing phrase. It is the documented experience of thousands of owners who have put 80, 90, and in some cases, over 100,000 miles on these single carburetor engines. The valve clearance checks are not the nightmare they are on some bikes. The Shadow 750 uses screw and nut adjusters, meaning you slide a feeler gauge in, turn a threaded post until you feel the right drag, and lock down the nut. No camshaft removal. No expensive metal shims to source from a dealer at $15 each. A competent home mechanic with basic tools can handle the entire job in an afternoon. If you're shopping for a 2001 to 2003 Spirit or Ace, you should be paying between $1,500 and $2,500 depending on paint and tire condition. These bikes are worth every cent of that. Do not pay more because there are enough of them on the market that patience will be rewarded. If you want to navigate the used motorcycle market like someone who actually knows what they are doing instead of someone who learns expensive lessons, subscribe right now. We break down exactly what to look for before you hand over cash every week. Honda took the next step in 2004, a completely new aesthetic and a shaft drive. The first 2 years had a serious problem worth knowing about before you shop. The aero and shaft drive era, 2004 to 2009. By the early 2000s, the motorcycle market was shifting hard toward a retro aesthetic. Buyers wanted the look of a 1940s Indian motorcycle with Japanese reliability underneath. Honda responded in 2004 with a Shadow Aero. They gave it massive, deeply valenced retro fenders, a sweeping pullback handlebar, floorboards instead of foot pegs, and an incredibly low seat height that made it instantly popular with beginner riders and returning riders who wanted something easy to flat foot at a stoplight. That low seat height made it one of the most accessible cruisers Honda had ever built. The biggest mechanical change was swapping the chain drive for a sealed shaft drive. In theory, this is the ultimate cruiser upgrade. No more scrubbing chain links with a toothbrush. No more adjusting rear wheel alignment. No more replacing sprockets. Shaft drives are maintenance-free in the way chain drives are definitely not. In practice, the first 2 years of this transition contained a glaring and dangerous flaw that you need to know about before you hand over any money. Here is also some important context about what shaft drive actually means for your ownership costs. A standard motorcycle chain needs lubrication every 500 miles or so, adjustment as it stretches, and full replacement every 15 to 20,000 miles along with the sprockets, which runs to $150 or more per replacement. The shaft drive requires nothing but a 6-ounce gear oil change at specific service intervals. That is a dramatic reduction in routine maintenance cost and time, which makes it even more frustrating that the first generation of this shaft drive had preventable factory problems. Here's what Honda got wrong. The shaft drive was a genuine upgrade. The wiring that came with it in the first 2 years was not. The years to avoid, 2004 to 2005. The 90s had stator issues. The early 2000s Aero had something more dramatic. It is known in the mechanic community as the 3 yellow wires meltdown, and the name is accurate. Here is the very short electrical theory lesson you need to understand this. Your stator produces alternating current, like the outlets in your house. Your motorcycle's battery requires direct current. The electricity travels from the stator through 3 thick yellow wires, through a plastic connector plug, and into the regulator/rectifier to be converted. On the 2004 and 2005 Aero models, the factory plastic connector plug was highly prone to internal resistance. When electricity meets resistance, it generates heat. As dirt and moisture entered that poorly designed plug over time, the resistance increased. The plug got incredibly hot. The plastic housing melts together. Eventually, it would short out the entire charging system. The practical result, your bike dies while you're riding it. You might smell burning plastic coming from beneath your left thigh. These are not signs that inspire confidence in a motorcycle you are sitting on at highway speed. Some 2004 models also suffered from a separate assembly line error: dry shaft drive splines. Factory workers failed to apply sufficient moly paste to the splined gears connecting the rear wheel to the final drive unit. Metal-on-metal friction caused rapid, premature gear wear. If those splines strip out while you are accelerating, you lose all forward momentum instantly. If the stator plug melts and takes the stator with it, you are looking at $150 to $300 in parts alone, plus the labor of removing side covers and draining oil to access the stator. There is a cheap proactive fix that costs almost nothing. Cut the melting plastic plug out entirely before it fails, and solder the 3 yellow wires directly together for about $10 in supplies. No plug, no resistance, no meltdown. Problem permanently resolved before it becomes a problem. Here's the key point. A seller who knows about this flaw and has already performed the solder fix is a seller who does their homework. That is a good sign about how the rest of the bike has been maintained. A seller who has no idea what the 3 yellow wires are is a seller who has not been paying attention. Factor that into how you evaluate the whole machine. If the final drive splines are already destroyed, and you will know because there will be metallic grit in the gear oil or visible scoring on the spline shaft, you are looking at replacing the entire rear hub assembly, which can exceed $500. That is not a repair you want to discover after purchase. These are not small numbers on a bike that might be listed for $2,000. Inspect carefully. Walk away willingly. There are enough good examples on the market that you do not need to talk yourself into a problem bike. Honda sorted the electrical problems by 2007. What followed is widely considered the most reliable 𝐏𝐄𝐑 750 ever built. The forever years, 2007 to 2009. Honda identified the flaws and rectified them. By 2007, Honda upgraded the wiring harness, fitted superior electrical connectors, and sorted the final drive lubrication issues at the factory level. These late model Aeros are extraordinary machines. With a single 34mm carburetor dialed in from the factory and the sealed shaft drive eliminating chain maintenance entirely, this is the most bulletproof analog metric cruiser ever built. You check the tire pressure, you change the oil, you ride across the country. That is the entire extent of the maintenance relationship. The mileage evidence is everywhere on owner forms. 2007 to 2009, Aeros pushing 100,000 miles on original engines in original shaft drives with nothing replaced. The low compression engine barely works at highway speeds. The internals are practically on holiday. A well-maintained late model Aero should cost you between $2,500 and $4,000. Do not pay extra for aftermarket exhausts or leather saddlebags. You are buying the unkillable engine. The chrome cosmetics are irrelevant. The Aero was almost perfect. The one remaining annoyance was the carburetor, cold mornings, choke rituals, waiting for the engine to warm up before it would idle properly. Honda eventually fixed that too. But the first attempt at fuel injection introduced a terrifying new problem. Hit that like button right now if this is already saving you from making an expensive mistake. The next section covers the fuel injection era recall that caused motorcycles to shut off at 70 miles per hour in heavy traffic, and exactly what to check before you buy. Fuel injection arrived in 2010 and changed the ownership experience completely. But the first couple of years came with a recall that every buyer needs to know about. The fuel injection era, 2010 to present. In 2010, Honda introduced programmed fuel injection, PGM-FI, to the entire 𝐏𝐄𝐑 750 lineup. They also released the 𝐏𝐶 Phantom, a blacked-out, bobber-style cruiser with drag bars and matte paint that captured the dark custom trend of the 2010s perfectly. Fuel injection changed everything. Cold starts became instant and reliable regardless of temperature. The internal computer automatically adjusted the air-fuel mixture for altitude, meaning you could ride from the California coast up into the Rocky Mountains without the engine ever gasping. No choke, no warm-up ritual, no pilot jet clogged with ethanol residue. The fuel-injected Shadow also became significantly easier to store through winter. With a carburetor, you have a choice. Either drain the float bowls fully before storage, or accept that gummy varnish deposits will be waiting for you in the spring. With fuel injection, the system self-purges, the injectors stay clean, and the bike starts in April exactly as it did in October. That alone is worth the upgrade for a large portion of riders. The rollout was not without technical problems, though. Some of them were alarming. The fuel injection worked. The sensor controlling one of its safety features did not. The years to avoid: 2010 to 2012. Transitioning from a purely analog carburetor to an electronic fuel injection system requires an army of new sensors: manifold absolute pressure sensors, intake, air temperature sensors, throttle position sensors. On the early PGMF's iShadow models, a specific sensor was dangerously faulty. The 2010 to 2012 models were subject to a massive, highly publicized factory recall involving the bank angle sensor. Here's what a bank angle sensor does, because it is actually a clever piece of engineering. It is essentially an electronic pendulum mounted under the seat. If you crash and the bike goes down on its side, the sensor detects the extreme lean angle and immediately shuts off the fuel pump and the ignition. This prevents the engine from running while oil-starved and stops the fuel pump from spraying petrol over a hot engine if a line ruptures. Smart, right? The problem: the defective wiring and sensitive internals on these early sensors caused them to randomly trigger while the bike was perfectly upright. Road vibration would trick the computer into thinking the motorcycle was horizontal. The computer would instantly cut the engine while riders were cruising at 70 miles per hour in heavy motorway traffic. That is not a minor inconvenience. That is a terrifying loss of engine braking, power steering, and electrical systems all at once, at highway speed with traffic behind you. The way this played out in practice was specific and consistent. Riders would be cruising at legal motorway speed. The road would have a rough patch or a bridge expansion joint. The vibration would trigger the sensor, and the engine would cut out instantly. No warning light, no gradual fade. Instant shutdown. The bike would then coast until the rider could safely pull over, at which point they would have to wait for the sensor to reset before it would start again. Multiple riders documented this happening repeatedly on the same commute. There were also isolated but well-documented issues with early fuel pump relays randomly failing, resulting in a bike that would crank endlessly but refuse to start. You turn the key, press the button, hear the engine spin, and nothing fires. Not ideal. If you're looking at a 2010 to 2012 model, you must check the VIN with a Honda dealer to confirm the bank angle sensor recall was completed. The VIN check is free and takes 3 minutes. If the recall has not been performed, you have two options: walk away or negotiate a discount large enough to cover the repair and handle it yourself. If you need to replace a failed fuel pump relay, budget $150 to $250 for parts and labor. More importantly, do not buy a motorcycle with an unresolved safety recall that causes sudden engine cutout at motorway speed. No asking price makes that acceptable. Once the early electronic gremlins were permanently resolved, the fuel-injected Shadow 750 became virtually indestructible. From 2013 onward, the fuel-injected Shadow became almost maintenance-free. The forever years, 2013 to present. 2013 and newer models are the absolute pinnacle of mid-size cruiser reliability. No carburetors to gum up with ethanol-laced fuel over winter. The shaft drive requires practically zero maintenance. The water-cooled engine operates at incredibly low, unstressed RPM. You are essentially buying a two-wheeled Honda Civic. It lacks the massive horsepower of a Harley-Davidson Milwaukee 8, but it also lacks the massive repair bills, which is a trade-off many people find very acceptable. Honda dealerships routinely service EFI Shadows with 75,000 miles on the clock that run as smoothly, quietly, and efficiently as the day they left the showroom. The shaft drive components on these later machines are equally solid. No spline wear issues, no wiring harness concerns, just a sealed drivetrain that asks for gear oil changes on a schedule most owners print out and forget about. The Phantom trim deserves a specific mention because it commands a premium for a reason. The blacked out engine, matte paint, drag bars, and minimal chrome give it an aggressively distinctive aesthetic that the standard Aero does not approach. If you plan to keep the bike for years rather than flip it, the Phantom trim is worth paying for. If you plan to customize it, the standard model saves you money with no practical mechanical difference. Because these are modern, fuel-injected motorcycles, they hold their value well. Depending on the year, the mileage, and whether you're buying the Aero or the highly sought-after Phantom trim, expect to pay between $4,000 and $7,000. You have now identified your forever year, found a clean example, and the seller seems reasonable. Before you hand over any money, you need to perform 3 specific checks right there on the driveway. If a seller refuses to let you look this closely, walk away. They are hiding something. Subscribe right now. The 3 checks below are the difference between buying someone else's headache and buying one of the best value cruisers on the used market. We cover bikes like this every week. You have found your forever year. Before any money changes hands, 3 checks. This one matters on every single generation. Pre-purchase check 1, the stator plug inspection. This check is relevant even on newer models. Heat and electrical resistance are the long-term enemies of every cruiser, regardless of production year. Ask the seller to pop off the left side plastic cover. It usually pulls off with rubber grommets or requires a single hex key. Look near the battery box and follow the thick wire loom coming from the left side of the engine block. You're looking for a plastic connector containing 3 thick yellow wires. Pull that connector out into decent light and look at it carefully. Is the plastic housing turning brown? Does it look warped or feel brittle? If you see any signs of melting or heat discoloration, this bike has a severe charging system issue developing. It is a ticking clock that will eventually leave you stranded. The stator plug passed inspection. Now check underneath. The stator plug looks clean. Now check underneath the engine. Pre-purchase, check 2, the coolant weep hole. Because the Shadow 750 is liquid cooled, it relies on a mechanical water pump to circulate coolant through the engine. Inside that pump is a mechanical seal separating the engine oil from the coolant. When that seal eventually fails, Honda built in a brilliant failsafe called the weep hole. Get down on your hands and knees and look under the water pump housing on the lower left side of the engine near the shifter pedal. You will see a tiny hole drilled into the metal casing. If the internal seal fails, leaking coolant escapes through this hole instead of mixing with the engine oil and destroying the bearings. Run your finger under that hole. Dried green or blue crust means the internal water pump seal has failed. Wet, slippery coolant means it is actively failing right now. Replacing a water pump on the Shadow requires draining both the oil and the coolant, pulling the left side engine cover, and pressing in new mechanical seals. It is a messy, multi-hour job that will easily cost $400 at a dealership. A clean, dry weep hole is what you want. Anything else is a negotiating point or a reason to leave. The weep hole is dry. Here's what that clean example is actually worth. What you are actually buying, the real value proposition. Let us step back and look at the big picture, because the Honda Shadow 750 deserves a proper defense of why it belongs in the conversation at all. You can buy a 2007 to 2009 Aero, the forever year shaft drive model, for between $2,500 and $4,000 depending on condition. That buys you a liquid-cooled V-twin with a low-maintenance shaft drive, a proven single carburetor fuel system, and an engine that has demonstrated across thousands of documented examples the ability to reach 100,000 miles without major work. Compare that to the alternatives in the same price range. A used sport bike at that money will likely need tires, brake pads, and a valve inspection immediately. A used Harley-Davidson Sportster at $3,000 is going to be old enough to have its own opinions about maintenance, and parts are not cheap. A used European Naked at that price needs a thorough pre-purchase inspection just to rule out the catalog of known issues. The Shadow 750 in a forever year is boring in the best possible way. There is no drama, there is no gotcha. You check the 3 things we listed, you verify the service history, and if everything looks right, you pay the asking price and ride home. That is a rare quality in the used motorcycle market, and it is worth paying for. The insurance costs are also worth mentioning. The Shadow 750 qualifies as a standard cruiser in most insurance categories, which means premiums are extremely low compared to sport bikes. A 25-year-old rider on a Shadow 750 will pay a fraction of what they would on a 600cc sport bike. Over 5 years of ownership, that difference adds up to real money. One final check for shaft drive models, and this one catches most sellers completely off guard. This check applies to the shaft drive models from 2004 onward, and most sellers will not see it coming. Pre-purchase check 3, the final drive fluid. The final drive unit at the rear wheel is the lifeline of the whole system. It requires a specific thick gear oil, 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐑 gear oil, to keep the internal gears from grinding themselves to dust. Look the seller in the eye and ask them, when did you last change the 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐑 gear oil in the rear hub? Watch their face. If they look at you with a blank expression or say they did not know you had to change it, you have found a meaningful negotiating point. The final drive holds about 6 ounces of fluid. If it has been running on the same 6 ounces of degrading oil for a decade, the internal gears have been suffering in silence. While you are there, look at the rear hub itself. Are there dark, oily streaks running down the metal casing? If so, the internal oil seals have blown out and the hub is leaking gear oil onto the rear tire. That is not just a maintenance problem, it is a crash hazard. Oil on a tire ends conversations suddenly. Leaking hub or neglected fluid. Negotiate the price down heavily or walk away entirely. The Honda Shadow 750 is a legend of the used market. The right year, properly inspected, will give you 100,000 miles of reliable, cheap, enjoyable riding with a maintenance schedule that fits on an index card. The wrong year will teach you expensive lessons about motorcycle electrical systems, carburetor synchronization, and shaft drive spline repair that you did not sign up for. The summary is simple. Avoid the 98 to 99 ACE models with dual carburetors and stator problems. Avoid the 2004 to 2005 Aero models with the 3 yellow wires meltdown and dry splines. Avoid the 2010 to 2012 EFI models until you have confirmed the bank angle sensor recall was completed. Everything else, 2001 to 2003 Spirit, 2007 to 2009 Aero, 2013 to present EFI models, those are the forever years. Any one of them purchased in good condition is an exceptional machine for the money. Stick to the forever years. Inspect the wiring. Check the weep hole. Ask about the gear oil. And if the seller gets uncomfortable with any of those questions, that discomfort is information. Use it. One final note. The Honda Shadow 750 community online is enormous and remarkably helpful. Before you buy any specific example, post the VIN and the year in any Honda Shadow forum, and you will get detailed experience feedback within hours. These owners know every model year quirk, every common failure, and every red flag in a Craigslist listing. Use that community. It costs nothing, and it might save you hundreds. If you enjoyed this breakdown, click on the next video on your screen right now, because we have got another one waiting for you just like this. Subscribe and join our tribe, and don't forget to like.